Welcome back to Podcast Recovery, everyone. We are your hosts, David O.
And Eric B.
Today we are joined by Damien. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Doing well, man. Where are you from, Damien?
I live outside of Annapolis in Maryland.
Oh, okay. So not super far from us.
No.
A little bit of a bop, but not too bad.
Yep.
When were you first introduced to recovery?
So I guess in terms of my own recovery, 2013 was the first time I considered it. 2015 was when I actually took the plunge.
Mm-hmm.
But I was familiar with the concept of recovery. I had friends in recovery before that.
Yeah. And how long have you been sober?
I have been sober since September 23rd, 2015.
Nice. All right. Well, with all that out of the way, we're going to turn it over to you to share your story with us. So take it away.
Sure. So my name's Damien. I am in long-term recovery. So I started drinking in college, a little bit before that in high school.
Yeah.
Really it wasn't a problem in college. I went to Penn State. It was a big drinking school.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of drinking going on. I did a lot of drinking. But it was not out of the norm for Penn State. And it didn't affect my life in a negative way.
Yeah.
Graduated from school, got out into the workforce, went out drinking on the weekends. It was, kind of a social thing, over as I got a little bit older, it became less and less, and it was really, it got to the point where, a good Friday night was going to Quiznos and getting a sub and watching the National Geographic Channel. That's how my life progressed into my 30s, right?
Yeah.
I got married. I was pretty much go out, have a couple of beers kind of guy. And we had got married, got into a house, and started talking about having kids. It was about 5 years before we did have a child. So I want to say I was probably around 35.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was about 35 when my son was born. And when my son was born, that triggered some pretty deep emotional trauma for me. And within, I'd say, about 8 months, I was pretty much starting to drink every day. It was, it started out with 1 or 2 beers. That became a couple 3, a couple 4 beers. At that time, the craft beer scene had really started to take off, and we were starting to see, high octane beers like 8 and 9, 10% beers,
Yeah.
And so, the volume, while the volume didn't change, the amount of alcohol that I was taking in started to change.
Yeah.
And then I started drinking bourbon, and I would say, probably well into, well after his first year of life, I was drinking every day, and I was drinking to excess, pretty much every day. did that for close to 7 years. In that time, I did not have any significant consequences. I was the kind of guy who had a lot of rules about my drinking. So I didn't start until it was, quote, quote, the appropriate time of the day to start drinking.
Yeah.
I didn't, I never drove drunk. And what that turned into was that I did most of my drinking at home. I did most of my drinking in the kitchen while I was cooking dinner alone. I would come home from work. I'd cook dinner. I would pour myself a cocktail. I'd drink heavily through dinner. We used to have arguments at dinner. I used to call them the dinner explosion. They were fueled, in part because, I couldn't control myself because I was heavily intoxicated.
Yeah.
We would get done with dinner. I might have a couple more drinks after dinner, and then I would, quote, quote, put my son to bed. And what that meant was that I would lie down with him in his bed, read him a story, and both of us would fall asleep. So he fell asleep, and I passed out.
Yeah.
Right. That went on. So he was born in 2007. In 2013, I was starting to realize that I had a problem. Yeah. And in the summer of 2013, I made a decision that I was going to take 30 days off of drinking. And at that point in time, I was writing a blog that was meandering and aimless. And I announced on my blog that I was, taking 30 days off of drinking. And I did. I successfully didn't have a drink for 30 days. And, I patted myself on the back. I celebrated that I hadn't done it. I waited a couple of extra days just for good measure. And then I poured myself a Manhattan.
Yeah.
Like a lot of us, I had that first Manhattan, and it wasn't long before I was drinking every day again. That fall, I went to a handful of AA meetings. A handful of 12-step meetings. When I looked at the where and when, I identified beginner meetings, and I thought, well, I'm a beginner. I should probably go to beginner meetings.
Yeah.
What I didn't know was that that not every meeting was the same.
Yeah.
And so I went to some beginner meetings. It was late fall, and I went to a handful of these beginner meetings, heard some horrendous stories. Stories that were not my story.
Yeah.
I saw, people who were visibly intoxicated, visibly high, who clearly just wanted to come in out of the cold and have a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
Homeless folks and whatnot. And I was going to the Red House in Annapolis. And so I quickly compared out, because I looked around and I saw all these people who had, these horrendous stories, people who, the program clearly wasn't working for.
Yeah.
And I didn't know at that time that the only requirement was a desire to stop drinking. Right. And so I said, clearly this doesn't work. And I'm not that bad, Yeah. I kind of explored a bunch of different literature. I read, Under the Influence. I, started looking into, moderation management as a, as a possibility. Maybe I can manage this drinking stuff. And, I just, I kind of took it easy for a little while, and then, I just started drinking again. And, I don't really know what it was. I was just at an emotional bottom. I mean, I felt terrible about myself. I would look at myself in the mirror and, tell myself that I was, a terrible person. And, I just couldn't believe that I was doing this.
Yeah.
And so, this one night, this one Sunday afternoon, we had some family over, and I got annihilated. And I was cooking dinner, and, I don't know what temperature the steak was that I served, but it was definitely not, it was definitely not fit for human consumption. It was on the rare side, not on the well done side. So it could have been rescued, but I was not cognizant of it, and I got up the next morning. I just felt awful, and I wrote a journal entry, that basically, admitted to myself that I was slowly committing suicide and that I needed to seek help. And that was a Monday, and I had committed to myself, okay, I'm going to go to a meeting tonight. I looked up a meeting, and I made all the mental plans for, this is going to happen. And then it got to be the end of the day. It had been a stressful day at work. I had to coach soccer that night. I coached soccer. I didn't have a drink that day, but I didn't go to a meeting either. The next day, I had an interview for a job that I really, really wanted. But logistically, it was on the other side of the Beltway in Northern Virginia, and I knew I couldn't do it. And, I went and I had the interview, hit it off with the guy. And as I was leaving there, I was like, I know I can't take this job. I just know I can't do it. And I was driving home, and I was like, well, maybe I should stop for a bottle of bourbon. And I was like, no, you shouldn't stop for a bottle of bourbon. But I got home, and I still had beer in the fridge. And so I drank every beer that was in the fridge. And about 7:30, 8 o'clock, I was feeling really bad for myself. I was sitting on the couch, and a friend of mine posted this video for an establishment in Shippensburg, Pennsylvania called The Harbor. And it looked like a bar. Except for it was alcohol free, right? And, there was all this talk of, people who were having a good time, and why it was a cool place. And I was like, man, that is exactly what I want to be able to do. And I didn't know at the time that it was, specifically a sober hangout. I didn't know that it was sponsored by a minister who was in recovery. But I knew that it looked cool, and I decided, hey, I'm gonna get up tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock in the morning and go to the first meeting of the day here in Anne Arundel County. And I looked at my wife. I said, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna put our son to bed. I'm gonna get up tomorrow morning and go to a meeting. And I don't think she believed me, but I did. I got up. I went to a meeting, and all I could say in that first meeting was, that it had taken me a long time to get there. I talked to a couple of people afterwards. They gave me the where and when. They offered me a big book.
Nice.
And, the guy who became my sponsor at that time said to me, do you think you cannot drink today? I said, yeah. He said, do you think you can come back here tomorrow? I said, yeah. He said, all right, don't drink and come back tomorrow.
Nice.
And that's what I did.
Yep.
So, I got into recovery in September of 2015. Shortly after that, I started writing a blog. I got real active on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
I got linked in with a lot of folks on Twitter, and it was like having support right there on my phone.
Yeah.
All the time. Met some, virtually met some really cool people who offered me lots of. I continued to go to meetings. I went to meetings every day for about 11 months. And then I slowly kind of tapered off. The next thing I knew, I'd been sober for a year.
Mm-hmm.
Today I live a life that is, happy, healthy, and free.
Yeah.
Right? Occasionally people ask me, hey, how do you know whether you're an alcoholic or not? And I'm always say, look, I don't think that's the right question, right? I think the questions you should be asking yourself are you happy, are you healthy, and are you free?
Yeah.
Right? Because when I was drinking, I wasn't happy. I surely wasn't healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea what freedom looked like. I get up these days, I take my son to school, typically go for a walk or a run sometime during the day. Sometimes I go for a bike ride. I check in with the folks on Twitter, check in with people in real life. I'm responsible. People want to be around me. My wife wants to be around me now. My son wants to be around me. And I'm just living a really happy life.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't trade it for the world. So, through my writing, I uncovered some things about my past that made me kind of understand why things went sideways after my son was born. And it all kind of came down to it came down to the fact that I didn't know how to be a father, and I wasn't ready to be. Well, I shouldn't say I wasn't ready to be a father. I didn't know how to be a father, and I didn't have anybody to talk to about how to be a father. So my birth father committed suicide when I was 5.
Oh, wow.
And I carried that trauma. I've carried that trauma for 46 years. I'm just now starting to address it in therapy. I had the good fortune of having another man step into my mom's life. And while he was technically my stepfather, I think of him and refer to him as my father. He took me and my brother in as if we were his own. And he showed me that family is not defined by blood.
Yep. Absolutely.
But he died suddenly and tragically when I was 29. He had a massive heart attack in the middle of the night.
Oh.
And so here I am. I've wanted to be a father all my life. I've finally become a father, and I've got all this, all these kind of mixed up feelings about fatherhood.
Yeah.
Right? And that is that's what triggered me to go off the rails. So it's been, there's been a lot of work around that. Like I said, I'm starting to address some things, with a professional therapist.
Nice.
I've been through the steps. I'm not by any stretch a traditionalist. I believe that there are, many paths up the mountain. And, what's important is that we, that those of us who choose to get into recovery, that we stay in recovery. And whatever it takes to do that, and whatever works for anybody to do that is what's right for that person.
Absolutely.
So I think I've probably gone a little over, the 20-minute kind of mark.
No, you're good.
Okay. Twitter has been an amazing tool for me in my recovery. I got on it early, started searching for, sober, searching for, hashtag, hashtag AA, hashtag alcoholism, I quickly found out that hashtag AA doesn't actually lead you to sober people. I'm not quite sure what it does lead you to, but it doesn't lead you to sober people.
Yeah.
But I found this group of people, and, I have met, in real life now, probably 10 to 15 of the people that I've, regularly interacted with on Twitter. Some of them are, among my best friends now.
Wow.
And, it's been an unconventional but very, very healthy and productive, way for me to connect with other people in recovery.
Yeah.
I wrote my blog, Walking in Sober Boots for, I still post to it, but I was really active in it in my first year and a half to 2 years. And then I kind of got to a point where I felt like I maybe had said everything I needed to say. Yeah. And had explored everything I needed to explore. But, people still find me through that blog. People reach out to me. I've had a number, because I've been so open and vocal about my recovery, I've had a number of people who I've known throughout my life come to me looking for help. I've had friends from my industry who I have in some cases hadn't talked to in 15 or 20 years reach out to me. Yeah. Some of them have stayed sober, some of them haven't. But I got a chance to sit down with a good friend who I worked with 20 years ago. Just back in April, he was out visiting DC with his kids on their spring break, and I hadn't seen him in 20 years, and he was here from California, so we got together and had a cup of coffee, and it was awesome. So
nice.
So yeah, that's kind of my story. All
right.
I don't know that I have much more to say.
All right. Well, I'm sure we got some questions for you. You want to start, Eric?
Sure. So kind of going back to the beginning of your story, you were talking, and this is actually something that I did, and I think it kind of gave me this false sense of control. But you were talking about how you had rules built around your drinking. And, for me at least, that always gave me this false sense of power or false sense of control over the situation. I mean, without doubt, every time I lost that control, but it gave me this, kind of false power. Do you kind of feel like this, these rules that you had, quote unquote rules, allowed you to kind of feel like you had a handle on your drinking, or even like when you stopped drinking for 30 days, being like, I can, do this, did that kind of prolong your alcoholism?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. The rules were, crafted so that I could, not identify as an alcoholic, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you can't be an alcoholic if you don't drink before 5, right? You can't be an alcoholic if you don't have a DUI, Yeah. Well, how do you make sure you don't get a DUI? You don't drive, right? If you don't drive, you're not going to get a DUI, right? So there were the rules were definitely a response to an awareness that there was probably a problem. Mm-hmm. And they were a way for me to, kind of justify that, that I wasn't somebody who needed help.
Mm-hmm. Wow. All right. I'm going to sort of piggyback on that because that just sort of brought a question in my mind. So how did you find relating to people? Because you said also, like, when you first started coming into recovery, you heard like people's really bad war stories and everything like that, and it sort of turned you off. Since then, have you been able to relate to those people and really find common threads in your stories? And how difficult was that to like relate to people who had more extreme stories?
Yeah, so one of the best things that ever happened to me was, I tried a couple other times. I tried, I'm going to take some more time off drinking, Mm-hmm. And in one of those periods, a fraternity brother reached out to me, and, who I knew didn't drink anymore. I didn't know that he was, in recovery. Mm-hmm. Really. I didn't know that he was, that he went to 12-step meetings.
Yeah.
But, he called me, and, he started talking to me about 12-step. And I was like, look, man, I let me tell you what my experience was, and there's all this talk about God, and, I'm like, I just don't think it's for me. And he said, look, man, I'm not a Christian. Mm-hmm. And, he said, that if I were to identify as anything, it would probably be a Buddhist. Mm-hmm. He said, so, what you need to do is you need to go to a meeting and, listen for the things that sound similar, mm-hmm. not the things that sound different.
Yep.
And, take what you like and leave the rest.
Yep.
And so, one of the things that I did differently that second time around was, I went to a meeting at 6:00 in the morning. Now, there are some rough people in that meeting, right? There are rough people in every meeting.
Oh, yeah.
But people who are getting up to go to a 6:00 a.m. meeting, mm-hmm. they're getting up to go to a 6 a.m. meeting so they can go to their work day, right? Yeah. And they, it was a different crowd. I mean, I went in there, and there were rough people, rough around the edges, but there were also people that were there dressed in their business attire, getting ready to go to work, you know? And so I immediately felt more at home because, it was like, wow, these people are like me.
Yeah.
But I was also at that point so done, mm-hmm. Like I was at the point where I wanted to be done. I couldn't imagine drinking anymore, and I couldn't imagine not drinking. Mm. And so, I went in the second day I went in, I admitted that I'm an alcoholic. I cried. I literally said, I'm scared shitless. I don't know what to do. I need help. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget it. This really big dude, as I was sharing and pouring my heart out, I saw him get up, but I didn't know what he was doing. But he went to the chip box and he got out a 24-hour chip, and he came over when I was done with my share, and he said, we have a tradition here, and we give out chips for various lengths of sobriety. I'd like you to have a 24-hour chip.
Nice.
And he gave me a chip and a hug, and I knew that I was going to be all right.
Yeah.
And it was just suddenly, okay, I'll give this a go. And I still struggled, man. I heard, and I still struggle today. I hear lots of stuff in the rooms that I don't agree with.
Oh yeah.
That doesn't fit me, but what I've come to realize is, I've come to realize, a number of things. I've come to realize that I do have a concept of, a power greater than myself. I don't choose to name it.
Mm-hmm.
I know where I feel comfortable and where I feel like I am, in touch with that power.
Mm-hmm.
And that's out in nature.
Yeah.
Anything that inspires awe is really where I feel that. But I also know that, the person who is going to talk, very adamantly about, a very theistic experience, that's what they need. And if that's what keeps them sober, so be it.
Yep.
Right? They're not necessarily, and even if they tell me that I need that, I know what I need. I know I don't necessarily need to subscribe to that belief. And it took me a long time to get over that, right? Because I had some, I talked about some trauma from the past. Another trauma was, related to spirituality, where, I went to a Catholic school, and at some point in time, someone in authority, whether it was a nun or a priest, I don't know, but somebody told me that, my father could never go to heaven because he had committed suicide.
Oh.
And, as a dude, as a fourth grader, that's incredibly scarring, you know? And
that's wrong.
Yeah. Well, it was church doctrine for thousands of years. And, they were just repeating what they had been told. So I'm always very careful. My experience with what people repeat as rote repetition has led me to really question things in the rooms, right? And I'm very conscious of all right, just because everybody else says it doesn't mean that I have to say it. I've recently started to introduce myself as somebody in long-term recovery because, from my perspective, I was an alcoholic when I was drinking, right? I used to smoke. I was a smoker when I was smoking. I don't call myself a smoker anymore, right? Because I don't smoke. And I'd rather focus on the solution rather than the problem, right? And so for me, the solution is recovery, whereas alcoholism is the problem, and while I may be powerless over alcohol is not powerful over me. Yeah. And I think that's an important distinction. So.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. All right, Eric.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
All right, so David, you're going to hate me for this question. But you were talking about, moderation management for, I believe for you were considering that as an option. And,
I think I know where this is going.
Well, it's an important question.
Okay.
Because, it also goes back to what you consider recovery to be. And the concept, I believe personally that recovery is an individual experience that is personalized for the person. So I guess the question is, having, done, different parts of recovery and looking into that, where do you think, this is kind of like a hot take type question, but where do you see moderation management's role in the recovery scene? Do you believe it has a place?
You're right. I hate this question.
I know you do. That's why I'm asking it. Do you believe it has it is a question. Like, do you believe it has a place? Because they have literature, they have meetings, they have all of that. Where do you kind of see, having looked into that, where do you see their place in recovery?
So I think it's an excellent question. Broaden it a little bit to the topic of harm reduction, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a school of thought centered around harm reduction, which is kind of the idea of reducing the harm that you're doing to yourself or to other people, right? And so is that recovery? I don't know whether it's recovery or not. I think it's part of the recovery community. It's not recovery for me, right? Mm-hmm. For me,
perfect.
At this point in time, I know that I need to be abstinent.
Mm-hmm.
Does it work? Are there people who drink heavily and figure out a way to manage it and moderate and live a happy and healthy and free life? Absolutely. I have friends who've done that. Is it possible that is recovery? Yeah, I think it is. I think it is a form of recovery, but it's like for me at this point in time, I just can't imagine going back to it.
No.
The reason that management didn't work out for me was, I couldn't find any face-to-face meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And, I couldn't moderate.
Yeah. Yep.
That's what it came down to.
100%.
Right? I just couldn't do it. So that's why it didn't work for me. But, I would never tell somebody, look, it's not a path worth considering. If you feel that it's the right path for you, then, you should consider it, give it a try, and, see where it goes. But you have to be willing to be honest with yourself, right? When, if it doesn't go the way you hope it'll go, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I do think harm reduction is viable. I do think, medically assisted treatment is viable. I don't, there are some people who are like, well, if you're a heroin addict and you take methadone, you're not really in recovery. Well, dude, you're not doing heroin, right?
Exactly.
So, that's a
huge,
big thing.
Right?
If you're, if you're,
but you can't moderate heroin use. There's not. I'm just gonna shoot dope on the weekends.
Yeah.
That's the. See, I'm not shooting. I'm not shooting dope 5 days of the week. I'm reducing the harm on any. So.
Well, I think that's up to the individual and what they're able to do. I think. I don't know. I don't think it's up to you to decide.
It's not
whether
up to me to
or
decide.
not
Absolutely
someone
not.
can choose their path they want to go down.
No, and Damien answered it perfectly. He said it's not the recovery for me, and it's not the recovery for me either.
No, yeah. I subscribe to abstinence.
Yeah, that's all I will.
I subscribe to abstinence as well.
Yes, we all do.
But
I would, I would also say, like, if you, let's take heroin out of the equation, right? Because heroin's, dude, that's hardcore stuff, right?
Yeah.
There are people who choose to take, Antabuse or. I think it's called naltrexone. So Antabuse makes you sick if you drink.
Yeah.
There's another drug that if you take it, then it blocks your dopamine receptors and your GABA receptors in your brain and basically short circuits the pleasure that you get from having a drink, right?
Yeah.
Dude, if taking that makes you stop drinking a 12-pack a day,
Oh, absolutely.
then
Do it.
I'm all for it.
100%.
Right? You know, like,
Yep.
you know, there should be no stigma. And I think that's a big problem in the recovery community right now. We've got,
Agreed.
we've got kind of these two camps. We've got, the progressive camp that is open to, science. And then we've got this other camp that's, this fundamentalist camp that says, you got to do it my way or the highway.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there are a lot of people dying, right?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
whatever it takes to keep people from dying, I support,
Yep. Absolutely. And
Perfect.
yeah, and Eric and I are like very similar thinking as you are. I think ultimately the goal is to live without those things, but if those are the necessary next step, the Antabuse, the Suboxone, the methadone, like whatever it is, if that's if that's a part of the journey to you ultimately like getting that happy, joyous, and free that you were talking about, and like the abstinence that all three of us subscribe to, then by all means do it, because you're 100%. You're right. You're not fucking drinking. You're not shooting dope anymore.
Well, some people might not ever get there, and that's okay.
And that's okay too. Absolutely.
Yeah. Whatever gets you to becoming a better person each day.
Yep.
Like I'm all for that.
Yep.
Are you improving your
absolutely.
life? Like, are you a better person today than you were yesterday? Mm-hmm. If so, like, awesome. That's great. Like, I think that to me, that's recovery.
Yeah. All right. I have a question for you. How important was it? Because I really like this. You met that guy and he really kept it simple for you. He was like, "Do you think you can not drink for 24 hours? Good. Come see me tomorrow." How and like that's really like simplistic recovery, and I like to keep my recovery as simple as possible too, because it's a simple program for complicated people, I believe. And how has it been, like, how crucial was it to keep it simple early in recovery and then keep going back to that simplicity as you get further in?
That's in the very early days, it was just don't drink.
Yep.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't drink.
Yep.
With time, I started to question a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
I really wrestled with the God stuff.
Yeah.
If you go out and read my blog, you'll find all kinds of posts about the God stuff. And, I am not, I do not think that, that the big book is, a religious text. I don't think that it's divinely inspired, right? I don't think that it is, that it has all the answers.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it has a lot of recommendations about how to live.
Yes.
And I think that there's a lot of useful information in it. But I think that there is room for questioning and exploration and deeper understanding outside of it, and frankly, it's okay to look at it and say some of this is wrong, right?
Yes. Yes.
So
Eric's very happy to hear that.
when I hear it's a simple program for complicated people, or I hear, keep it simple, like, I think that works for some people and that doesn't work for other people. Right.
Yes,
and
yes.
it goes back to, what I was saying earlier is, what works for some people might not work for other people. I was, talking with my therapist the other day about, some angst I have around the whole, still, 3.5 years into it, around the God stuff. And I said to her, look, God didn't get me sober, right? I don't know, I don't know that I can say what did, but, it was not a benevolent, old man on a white cloud who got me sober. And she said to me, look, I think you need to consider that not everyone is as incredibly lucky as you. Yeah. And I said, well, what do you mean? And I said, what do you mean? She said, you got through detox without medical supervision. You were incredibly lucky that you did that.
Yeah.
She said, you could have died. And she's right. She said, you never had a DUI. You never had to go to rehab. You never were on, an IOP. She said, you've been incredibly lucky. You got this sobriety relatively quickly and relatively easy. She said, there are people in the rooms who are not sober. And she said, there are people in the rooms who the only thing that's working for them is a very tight hold on this concept that there is a benevolent God that is guiding their day.
Yeah, totally.
And if that works for them, then that works for them.
Absolutely.
Right? And so, I kind of came out of that with a better understanding of myself and saying, okay, I have had it relatively easy, and maybe that's why I bristle at some of the things that I bristle at, and maybe that's okay.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, early on, I did have to just keep it simple. Like, don't drink, don't go somewhere where there's going to be drinks.
Yep.
If you have to go somewhere where there's going to be drinks, have an exit plan, drive yourself, all those simple things that, that now I just take for granted, that, and I even break some of those rules now, like sometimes I go places where, where there are going to be people drinking, for work, and I don't have my own transportation because it's not feasible, and I just, but I know I can leave when I need to leave,
Absolutely.
So
right.
So yeah, I mean, keeping it simple early on, but I do think that there's room for skepticism and room for healthy questioning.
Absolutely. Yep.
Of course.
Of course.
Course.
I mean, my take on that, like for me and my recovery, like all the literature that are in, or that I have read and like participated with 12-step recovery, I really take that as like sort of a square one. Like that was the starting block for everything else I could get to in recovery.
Yeah.
Like it just opened the door. Like those opened the door, and then for me personally, there is so much more out there for recovery.
Yeah.
All right, Eric.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't believe in simplicity, so that's where I stand.
No, of course not. Your motives are always complex.
So I guess this is my last question.
You're like the Zodiac killer.
No. So and you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I think this is an interesting topic. Is kind of the social media and especially Twitter. I didn't even know about Twitter recovery until 6 months ago, and
sure.
I guess how important has that played a role in your recovery thus far? Because honestly, the way I've been looking at this now,
you seen that?
And
I have the exact same question written down. Son of a bitch.
The way that I see it now is that, or at least from the way that David and I have been interacting with people on Twitter, Twitter specifically. I know Instagram has a huge network as well, but I almost feel like I don't want to say should, but I would encourage people to create an account and kind of get involved in the community because of how strong it is. So, I mean, you talked about it a little bit before, but how much do you lean on that community in times of need, and how important was it in your sobriety and recovery?
Yeah, so sober Twitter has been absolutely critical for me in my recovery. There have been times early on, and I delete my old tweets now. But there were times early on where, I just needed to get something out, get something off my chest, and I'd throw it out there on Twitter, and I would have people come back and instantly, bam, bam, bam. Hey, I feel the same way. Here's what you can do to get out of yourself. Huge. And Twitter is honestly, it's one of the first things I look at in the morning. It's one of the last things I look at night. I have had phenomenal experiences with some of the people that I've met in real life because of Twitter. I've met, like I said, a number of people. I've met 2 people in London for a meeting because of Twitter. And I met Paul up in Toronto when I was in Toronto last summer and had dinner with him. And Mark and HD are 2 people that I regularly meet up with. Mark and HD and I have gone to concerts together. HD and I ride bikes together all the time. It's just I've made some actual real friends on Twitter. I've met people in California for dinner. So it has been a vehicle to connect with people. Now, I didn't just reach out my first day and say, hey, let's meet up. It was after I got to know some people and kind of got a sense of who they actually were. Because, let's be honest, there are bad actors on the internet. I work in cybersecurity, I work in cybersecurity. So, I've been very cautious about it, about meeting people in real life. But, just from a virtual perspective, even if you don't ever meet anybody, the fact that there's somebody out there reading tweets and responding and giving you support really 24 hours a day. We got people in South Africa, we got people in Dubai, we got people in London, and we got people in Canada. There are people everywhere who are lifting each other up on a daily basis, and that for me has been just phenomenal. I don't know that I would have gotten through the early days without it, because while you can call your sponsor all the time, there are limits, right? Yes, you should be able to call your sponsor any time of the day, but there are times when you can't get a hold of your sponsor, or and just having people out there has been phenomenal. I remember one night, this is a really cool story. One night in 2016, I was hanging out with my buddy Mark, who I met on Twitter. We were watching a football game, and there was this girl on Twitter talking about how she really wanted to use. And Mark and I started talking to her on Twitter, and we spent a couple hours walking her off the ledge in 140 characters or less. And
wow,
she's still clean, she's still sober, and she is living an incredible life now. And she and I have never met. We probably will never meet. But Amy and I, when she celebrates a milestone, I congratulate her, and she quickly comes back to me every time and says, "You really made a difference in my life," and that's phenomenal. It doesn't always work out that way. There are people that you try to work with, you try to talk to who, they fade in and out. You're not really sure if they're going to stay sober or not.
Yep.
There are limits to the platform, but it can be very powerful. And I honestly think Mark and I probably helped save Amy's life that night. And it was pretty crazy. It was pretty cool.
Nice.
That's awesome.
That's amazing. All right. I have no more questions. Like, pretty much everything I wrote down as a question, you answered as we were talking, and
Cool.
you did a great job, man. We really appreciate you coming out, man.
Yeah, real cool share.
Yeah, you had a great share. So we're gonna give you a quick golf.
Yeah, thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us, man. We're gonna give you a golf clap. We don't want to hurt our microphones. And now we're gonna give you a quick minute to talk to all the struggling addicts out there, all the struggling alcoholics, anybody who needs to hear a message. What do you have to say to them?
So, I would say that if you're struggling with substance abuse of any kind, know that you're not alone, and know that there are people who are willing to help you dig yourself out of the hole.
Yep.
And know that you are, know that you're worthy, know that you're enough, know that you're loved, and know that you're capable of loving. And take those words and own them, because it's true.
Absolutely. Love it. That's perfect, man.
And then you also have a blog. Do you kind of want to let people know where to find your blog or any other things like your Twitter handle or anything else where we can find you online?
Yeah, sure. My Twitter handle is @SoberBoots, and my blog is at soberboots.org. I'm active on Twitter. I'm trying to get myself to write more frequently for my blog. My blog there's also a Facebook page that gets all of my posts from my blog. So if you search for Walking in Sober Boots on Facebook, you'll find it. And you can reach out through that page as well. Love for people to read my blog, comment, ask questions, challenge me. Tell me I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Sometimes I am,
Oh, yeah. All right.
So.
Cool.
All right. Awesome. Well, we would like to thank our guest, Damien, for joining us today. Here at Podcast Recovery, we are aiming to expand the scope of support for recovering addicts. Accessibility and convenience of helpful services is paramount to combating addiction. We work to bring the message of recovery to every addict, wherever and whenever it is needed. We believe that a powerful voice of recovery should be obtainable, practical, and at the touch of a button. Every addict deserves to hear a message of hope, and Podcast Recovery is here to provide it. Follow us on Twitter, follow us on Facebook, check out our friend Damien, share, subscribe, retweet, all that great stuff, but most importantly, stay safe, stay clean.